Hello, welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the Pittsburgh Modular Lifeforms Modular Organism SV-1 Blackbox Edition. I did post a little video a few days back saying, this is what it sounds like. Ask me any questions in the comments, and thanks for those. I will endeavour to answer them as we go on. But what is the Lifeforms Organism SV-1? Well, it's essentially a single synth voice, Eurorack format. So this is essentially the same as a Eurorack module, fits into a black box case. That's why it's called the Black Box Edition. The case is actually really nice and solid and sturdy, comes with an external power supply. Although I have to say, the power supply is actually a bit short. The lead on it is only about so long, and it doesn't actually even reach to the floor here, which would have been kind of nice because it's nice to have a bit of extra length on it just so you can stretch it around the place. A little bit short, folks. Anyway, that aside, what this essentially is a monophonic synthesizer, modular in nature but semi-modular, which means that the signal path is kind of normalized, so you don't need a whole bunch of wires and cables to get some sound out of it. And in many ways this has been the trend, because we've seen, I did the Zero Coast not that long ago, there's various other includes separate voices, and this is kind of in answer to people who perhaps don't want to get into Eurorack. They can't think about maybe getting a massive case, power supply, choosing which modules. In this sense, what you do get is a kind of manufacturer specific synth voice to get you started, or perhaps if that's the only way you want to go, you could go in a number of ways with this. The advantage is that it also allows you to patch it up with existing modular CV gear. The thing about the Lifeforms is it's self-contained essentially. So starting over here, we've got the input module, which comes with a MIDI input. So this is on a little cable here, which is plugged into the input here, and this module turns the incoming MIDI signal into gate and CV. The CV is normalized to VCO1 and the gate is normalized to the ADSR. So I play a keyboard and I'm triggering this oscillator, and I'm also triggering the envelope. Now what also is happening, the signal is normalized into the mixer. I've got it patched up differently so I can show you things in the scope, but allows us to bring the mixer. The mixer then goes into the VCF, which is a state variable multi-mode filter, and then into the ADSR. The ADSR is normal to the VCA. The VCA then comes down here into the output. There are a whole bunch of patch points in it, well over 50 patch points, so you can get much more complex if you want. But let's start with the oscillators, because they're a new core for Pittsburgh. So we're listening to the sine wave at the moment. You can see it's a nice and shapely one, goes right down. You won't be able to hear that. I can just about feel it coming out of the speakers. And it goes right up into way above ultrasonic. So we've got a pretty good range on that. Tracking seems pretty good. Let's take a look at the triangle. Another lovely shape. Pulse width. Let's turn that down a bit. We can actually change the width. There's no manual control of the width, but there is a width control voltage. So that's normalized from this little analog oscillator here. And what's nice is it goes through zero, so you can get rhythmic stuff. Now, I am a fan of pulse width, as I'm sure you've heard. If you haven't, then you probably will from somebody. And I have to say, this does sound pretty nice. If we come back to this. It's got that nice, rich, slightly tearing sound that I really like. So, anyway, coming back to the scope, let's come out of, we've also got good old saw wave. Again, really nicely shaped. This is coming through a wide open VCF. Goes right down into LFO territory, and again, right up. And very, very high. I mean, I can barely hear that. You're probably just about, you can see it in the scope anyway. Finally, the other wave that's really interesting is the blade wave. Now, the blade wave is like a ramp down. Take the volume up a bit, but you can modulate it, so it's a modulatable wave. And what that does is kind of almost like shift an octave. So it's actually quite an interesting concept there, I must admit. While we're on the subject of this, we should also point out that, yes, we have an analog LFO, which has a triangle and a square wave output. It doesn't go right up into audio rates, but not far. The other thing that we've got here is the ability to automatically FM. The VCO2 is automatically sent to VCO1. So you can immediately get lots and lots of ring mod. And then if you take, say, the CV output from here and patch that into the volt per octave input of VCO2, let's try that with a sine wave. You're getting all that cross mod FM goodness, and that's actually pretty nifty, and you don't need to cross patch it, and that means you can get right up into the audio rates or right down into LFO territory. And then we can change the waves here because VCO2, which also has waves, it's got a square wave. If I patch that in here, it's got a saw wave, a triangle, and a sine. Square wave on the VCO2 is not pulse width modulatable, but you can't have everything. So here's a little patch that's just running off the internal arpeggiator, no chords involved. It's going to dial in a bit of pulse width, normal from the LFO, add some sub. The snappiness is all coming just from the VCA envelope. Now I'm going to add a bit of portamento and dial in some cross mod from VCO2. It does come with I think 5 or 6 of these quite nice sturdy cloth covered patch cables, just for those who are interested, so you can get started right away. If we now take the saw wave and we patch the analog LFO output, we'll take the triangle wave into the FM input rather than using the normal VCO1. Want to get a bit of vibrato. Now, you might not be able to see that, but it's a very fine control. Only a little bit is too much unless you're going really wide. And that's the thing I've seen in a couple of synths where sometimes the scaling on the pots is perhaps not as intuitive as you like, so it's actually quite a fine point. If you just want something subtle, it's actually quite hard to dial in. Another thing that I was asked about is what about the sync, because there was a sync input on this VCO1. So if I take the output of, let's take the saw wave out and go into the sync input, and then change the pitch of VCO2. Now, ordinarily, I'd be expecting to hear that kind of, you know, that kind of harmonic sweep. Doesn't seem to be happening with the live forms, and I have no idea why that is. I know that it's an odd behaviour, but that doesn't sound like sync at all, so I'm not entirely sure what the sync is doing there. But suffice to say that the oscillators themselves actually do sound really good. Although I will say, this is another question that came up, how long does it take to warm up? Remember, this is fully analog. It actually takes quite a long time, 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the temperature, to get the stability of the tracking and the oscillators. And that seems to be quite a long time. I don't know whether that's something that's just because it is analog, that's the way it goes, but it does seem to take a while to warm up. So one thing that is actually quite cool about this is the way the mixer works. Now, the mixer is essentially a 4-channel mixer, but it's split into 2. So if we start with it all down, there's nothing going on. I'll take the envelope down. Channel 1 is sine wave from VCO1. Channel 2 is sawtooth. Channel 3 is pulse. And that's normal, so we've got the mix of the first 3 waves. And then the bottom is a subwave, because actually this VCO1 has 2 subwaves. There's a sub 1 oscillator, -1, which is this one, and a sub -2, which I will patch in here. So I guess you could patch 2 of them together. have all of those waves going. So you can get quite a big amount of gain into the mixer and then out of there into the VCF. The thing that's quite cool about this is what we can do if we want is we can take inputs 1 and 2 and then come out of the bottom, which would basically isolate this as a 2-channel mixer, and then we can route that somewhere else. Same for the bottom. So we've essentially got 2 2-channel mixers or 1 4-channel mixer, which is kind of cool. That is actually normalized into the VCF. But before we go there, we should also mention that we've got a noise source, which, oops, let's just take that down. That's an analog noise source down here. There's also a sample and hold circuit, which is these 3 patches down here. This is an analog sample and hold, so that allows us to, well, if we take the output and patch that into the FM of... Now the clock of the sample and hold is taken from the LFO and the master tempo. Master tempo, if I zoom in, I'm not sure I'll be able to see this exactly, is controlled by the master clock, which is this flashing. You can tap the tempo. So you can see I can set the tempo here, and that is what's running the sample and hold rate. While we're here, the other thing that's kind of cool, as well as the arpeggiator that we've got here with various different modes, which I could just drop into arpeggiator mode. Let's take up to 10 notes. And run an arpeggiator value. We can change the mode of the arpeggiator. Several different modes, up and down, random, and there's some clever things that it does actually. With the random, you can set it so that it outputs a random gate voltage as well. So there's all sorts of randomness that it runs into that. More on this section here. There's also an LFO, which pressing this button here sets the wave. So if I now bring the LFO output here into this oscillator, this is running at the tempo. There's a random, ramp up, ramp down, and a sort of noise, which a digital noise and a sine wave. This is actually pretty handy because it's clocked from the master tempo, but it can also, you can set it to take the clock from incoming MIDI clock or from a clock input jack here. And the other thing is with the LFOs is you can divide and multiply the clock. So you can actually have one tempo doing one thing and then the LFO doing something else. So you could have a number of different modulation sources there. So that's actually quite handy and adds a lot of functionality. That extra LFO, particularly clocked, is really useful. Here's an example. I've got the subwave coming into the top channel of the mixer. I've also got the pulse width coming in, which is being modulated by one LFO. The arpeggiator is running at this clock, but I've also got the LFO coming out into the bottom mixer, which is running the sample and hold wave. Which is running at double the tempo. I've also got a bit of white noise coming in here, which is also being fed because this is mixing CVs and that's modulating the filter. So if I slow down the clock, you can hear that the sample and hold is matching double the tempo of the arpeggiator. Obviously got a bit of effects on there as well, just to sweeten it up. While we're here, additional outputs, we've got a pair of outputs for the LFO, so effectively it's like a mult. We've also got control, CC value output, velocity output from incoming MIDI, so CV and gate outputs here as well. So you can actually maybe run additional modules external to this from these, or use these to trigger various other functions on the synthesizer. So next in the chain is going to be the VCF. That's normal from the mixer, so the mixer output is normal to the VCF. So now what I've got is just a saw wave, which I'm bringing up via the mixer, normalized from VCO1. This is a state variable, I guess 24 dB filter. No resonance. This is a sawtooth going into it. It's got a slight quack to it. Start bringing up the resonance. Nice to see a great big knob here as well, because it's obviously something that you're probably going to want to be full resonance. You get those nice kind of distorted quality to the filter. One thing that is interesting is it's not resonant, it's not self-resonant. So if we come back and I just take the mixer outputs down, there is no self-resonance, and I think that's one of the things that the state variable filter is a characteristic of this one. We can also modulate the filter. There's an input for that, but that's actually normalized from the ADSR here. So if I dial that in, that brings up two things. ADSR is very snappy, plucky, they describe it at, and it definitely has a kind of quite a fast aspect to it, and it's got a nice quality to it. The other thing that we should point out is obviously this is a multi-mode filter. The low pass is normalized into the signal chain, but we can bring out band pass. So if I bring that in just by patching it, let's take the modulation out, turn it up. Slightly SEM-like quality there. And we've also got a high pass. And these all work simultaneously. I should also point out that we can drive the filter harder. Taking it back. So we can make it cleaner or more driven depending on how much signal we feed into it from the mixer. Actually, I didn't mention one thing about the mixer is it will work on CV and on audio, so you've got a mix and match kind of approach there. Now we're over to the final section of the synth, and what we've got here is a dedicated VCA. ADSR controls the control voltage in of the VCA, but we could just as easily patch that from an LFO or any other thing that we wanted to, and that in turn comes down to the output stage. And the output stage has an input, so we can patch directly into it. It's got a headphone output and a regular line output, which is what we're listening to. The other thing we got here, which is handy, is 2 rows of mults, so an input and 2 outputs, and that completes the amount of connections that there is on the unit. So that's the Lifeforms Pittsburgh Modular SV-1 Blackbox edition. I must confess, I do like the sound of Pittsburgh stuff, and I really like the features and functions that are in here. There's a lot of functionality crammed into this little box, kind of more so than I've seen on some other desktop synthesizers. Having said that, it's around about the same sort of price, certainly in the UK. Going to pay around about £550 to £600 UK pounds for this. Coming as it is, which seems to be about standard for this kind of thing. Obviously, we're being punished a little bit by the US dollar being so much stronger than the pound. If you're in the States, you're probably going to be paying a bit less than that. But I really like this kind of format, I must admit. It's sort of no fuss. You pick it up, you plug it in, and you can use it straight away. You don't need all of this kind of case and power supply and all that kind of stuff. However, it is actually going to end up being a gateway into this world. There's no denying it. All these patch points, all of this stuff is just begging to be connected to other things. But in case you are already addicted to Eurorack and you've got all the cases, I just unscrewed the case here and it just lifts out, and you can see that there's this little riser board which houses the power input and the on switch for the case. But that is actually, you can take that off, and presumably you could just get a cable to go into the power source here, and then you're good to go in terms of regular Eurorack. And that's going to save you about 50 quid, $50 if you just want to go for the Eurorack version, or perhaps a bit later on you've decided you've got a bigger case you want to put this in. Should be no problem at all. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Right, I'm just going to play out with, I'm going to throw some tones into a frozen reverb which is running on the Behringer XR18 little headless mixer. I'm controlling it via the iPad here, and then play some other stuff on the top on the liveforms. So let's see what happens. Freeze that. Add another note. Like that. So freeze there. Then let's just add some more things on. I'll get the arpeggiator going, I think.